Hello everyone. So today my final presentation will be focusing on introducing a phenomenal Manitoban woman composer, Sophie Carmen Eckhart Gramate. First of all, I will start with a biography introduction, and then I will be discussing her compositional style through different time periods, and a music example will be demonstrated at the end to prove her compositional development. So, Sophie, as an outstanding performer and composer, her contributions to the development of music in Canada and also music in Manitoba is invaluable. So, Dr. Sophie Carmen Eckhart Gramate was born in Moscow, Russia, January 6, 1899. Her mother, Katerina, is the piano teacher and French teacher to Count Leo Tolstoy's children and a pupil of Nicholas Rubinstein. Katerina was married to Nicholas, but they got separated before Sophie was born. So the matter of paternity is in doubt, and although Friedman is definitely not the father, Sophie born with his name, and until 1920, she was known professionally as Sonia Friedman. Sophie spent a short amount of time in England from 1902 to 1904. Katharina brings Sonia to the Tolstoyan colony in England, and they got reunited in 1904. Then Sophie was taken to Paris, where her musical education began. From 1906 to 1908, under her mother's instruction, her advancement at the piano was precocious. So she started composing really early when she was really young, and her alphabet pieces and character pieces were composed in Paris from 1905 to 1909. Although she had no formal violin education, she was accepted as a violin student at the conservatory, and also a piano student, of course, where she teacher were Alfred Brun and later Guillaume Brumet in September 1908. And she also studied piano there with Madame Chenet. Meanwhile, her mother teaches piano to survive. At age of 11, she gave solo concerts in Paris, Geneva, and Berlin, appearing on the programs alternately as pianist and as violinist. So apparently she's already a virtuoso performer since she was young. And in 1910, she receives first prize for piano. And Sonia's Etude concert is published, and it was dedicated to Gabriel Fauré, the director of the conservatory. And then she received the first prize for piano also, and then left the conservatory in 1913. She left the conservatory for actually two reasons. The first one is she felt like she did not receive any compositional instructions nor encouragement. And another reason is she felt there is unfairness in the awarding of performance prizes. So she left the conservatory. And then, after she left the conservatory, she moved to Berlin with her mother and sister. But unaware of the war brewing, they become destitute. She have to play in cafes for meals, and then in 1915 she gives four concerts at the Bachsteinsaal Berlin. Thanks to Qiuhan's financial support, she was able to study with Bronislaw Huberman. And in 20s, she toured with Edwin Fischer as virtuoso violinist and pianist. So in 1920, she married the painter Walter Gramate, who is her first husband, and mutually inspired by their respective art forms, Walter paints and Sophie gives concert and composes piano and violin sonatas and orchestra pieces. So they were unable to find a suitable home in Berlin due to hyperinflation, coal shortages, and low money. So Sonia and Walter went to warmer and cheaper Barcelona. So the year they spent in Spain were happy and productive. So Sonia wrote two piano sonatas, third violin suites, violin concerto, a lot of compositions I have already listed there. And in 1925, Sophie traveled to Germany for a concert series with a pianist, Edwin Fischer. And after her resuming her residence in Berlin in 1926, she also returned to Spain for night concerts in 1927. So her time in Berlin, the news of her versatility and virtuosity had reached the conductor Leopold Stokowski, who is enthusiastic about her violin concerto. He invited her to perform in Philadelphia and Chicago, but these were postponed owing to the serious illness of her husband. And unfortunately, Gramate died in 1929 of sorry, tuberculosis. 7 months later, Sonia goes to America, playing her compositional on both instruments with the Philadelphia Symphony under Stokowski and the Chicago Symphony with Frederick Stock. In 1930, she decided to give up her performing career and to concentrate on composition. From 1936, she studied with Max Tripp in Berlin for composition, and in 1934, other than her studies, she met and married Ferdinand Eckhart, an Austrian art historian living in Berlin who had been interested in the graphics of her late husband. Ferdinand and Sonia moved to his hometown Vienna, and around 1940s, inspired by the music community of Vienna, she re-established herself slowly as a composer in this new surrounding through house concert in her home. In 1947 to 1948, she is awarded 2 prizes for compositions from the Music Verein. 1950, she received honorable mention at the Austrian State Prizes for composition. And in 1953, her husband became director of the Winnipeg Art Gallery. That's when they come to Canada. And it actually takes time for the local music community to appreciate her unique qualities, but she gradually gained recognition in the form of commissions, honorable degrees, and frequent performances of her compositions. She also took a limited amount of teaching on piano and violin. And in 1955, she had her first recital in Canada on CBC Radio, played her piano sonata 5 and 6. And inspired by the new life, Sonia continues to compose, and in 1970, she received both an honorary doctorate in music from the Brandeis University and the title of professor from the Minister of Education, Vienna, Austria. In 1974, she was the first Canadian composer to receive the Diplôme d'Honneur, and shortly before her death, the CBC produced a 2-hour documentary of her life. The Eckhart Grammatic Library, which opened in 2012 at the University of Winnipeg, contains the personal and professional materials of Sophie Carmen Eckhart Grammatic, Walter Grammatic, and Ferdinand Eckhart. The next page is some commissioned works she have done in Canada, and we can see there are some major events for example the Canada Centennial and also the Provincial Centennial, and she also composed several larger ensemble works for the University of Manitoba. And next we're going to talk about her compositional styles. So, Igri has had a strict classical training as a performer, but not much on her composition. So, besides the basic theoretical studies with her mother and the conservatory, her writing of music was mostly dependent on herself until she was nearly 37. That's when she spent 3 intensive years with Max Trapp. So Marie Lloyd de Kock divided the entire compositional output of Igri into 3 general categories. The first one is pedagogical works, and virtuoso pieces and large-scale series compositions. But I think her compositional style changed, sorry, as she grew older. So her works can also be divided into according to the different time periods. So in her early years, her music from early years is marked by the spirit of freedom and the nature of improvisation, written almost exclusively for piano. And the works reflect the charm of the Parisian salon with a considerable gesture toward virtuosity and Bach polyphony. And this time period can be best presented by the 14 alphabet pieces and the 14 character pieces. By the 1920s, since she performed extensively throughout the 1920s, the compositions from this decade has designed purely for her performing career on both piano and violin. So it is not surprising that many virtuoso repertoires for has been composed in these decades. So here are some repertoires that she composed in this time period. And then a relative small output of the 1930s is due in part to the shock of Grammate's death, and also her wish to write for larger chamber groups and orchestra. And by the late 1930s, belonged to the development of a highly individual style of counterpoint and composition. And in this time period, she composed String Quartet Number 1 and Symphony in C major. Her preference for traditional forms and genres such as the string quartet, symphony, and concerto shows the influence of neoclassicism, which is also characterized the music of the 1940s. And beginning with the Piano Sonata Number 5, there is a change in compositional style and technique in her late period. And unlike her early periods, most of her Canadian works are orchestra and chamber compositions, and some of them were commissioned for important occasion, just like we talked before. And she completed 14 major instrumental works in Canada, and and even though she never held an official teaching appointment, but she maintained a great interest in teaching throughout her professional life. So start at 1959, she worked with Lauren Watson on a book about E-grade technique, which she described as a natural piano technique, but sadly it never got published. The next piece I'm going to talk specifically is the Piano Sonata Number 5. So interestingly, the first four sonatas were all written over a 5-year period and before she was 30. And after her study with Max Trepp, she revised this Sonata Number 4. And finally, in 1949, commissioned by the International Society for Contemporary Music in Vienna, she began the composition of the Sonata Number 5. So her intention for this piece can be best described in her own words. She said, "We know that an interval is the space between two given notes. All notes found, heard, played in between that interval are so-called filler notes, and which should never be rhythmically stressed." This sonata is considered as a tonal work, unlike her early works which are tonally based. In this sonata, the higher chromatic contrapuntal lines are contrasted to coincide vertically in quartal or polytonal harmonies. And this work is in 3 movements, but in fact, based on Marie-Lloyd Decock analysis, Igor intended these three distinct movements of this sonata to be considered more as sections forming one single movement in an expanded sonata form. And this single form design is actually similar to Liszt sonata in B minor. So about the 3 movements, the first movement was constructed by 2 musical themes. The first one is a tonal mean theme, and the second one is a set theme, which is built on 12 tones. and the slow second movement is based on its own ideas, and meanwhile the first and the third movement, they're sharing the same musical elements. And here's a recording down there. If you're interested, you can have a look of that. And then after her death in 1974, Sonia is buried beside Walter and her mother in Berlin. Ferdinand, her second husband, established the Eckhart Grammatik Foundation, so her lifelong dream could finally come true at Berlin University, where the first E-grade national music competition takes place. And that's all of my presentation for today. Thank you for listening and watching.